Well, it seems like AI is the subject of the night, so that's good. Hopefully this is something that you'll be able to incorporate into your own practice in education. So you think wilderness medicine and AI probably as far apart as you can get, but it turns out the people who like one tend to like the other too. So some background. First, as we all know, multiple choice questions. We could have hour-long debates about whether they're good or bad or okay. But regardless, we use them in education, and they're an objective way to look at mastery of material. Secondly, as we've seen through all the posters here and presentations, artificial intelligence is becoming more integrated in teaching and learning. Could also debate that for a while, but I think it's going to be a tool that we need to learn how to use because it's going to make all of our lives as educators better. It's not going to necessarily replace us, but it's going to make us happier. We all want to be happy, right? So really quick primary, this is probably basic review, but there's kind of two different types of AI that we're going to look at in this project. We're going to look at AI, which is like your large language model. This is like your Gemini or your chat GTP that you ask it a question and it gives you some sort of answer. And then we're going to talk about grounded AI or trained AI or fine-tuned AI. There's a lot of words that are kind of used to mean the same thing. And this is when you take an AI and you give it a certain material to pull its information from or to use to answer your questions or do the task that you assign it. In the case of our study, we used the Auerbach's Wilderness Medicine, which is sort of like our Bible of wilderness medicine, and the Wilderness Medical Society practice guidelines, which are peer-reviewed, published guidelines. And we fed all this information into our AI model, so it can only answer our prompt using that material. So the objectives of our study was to look at multiple choice questions, and we wanted to evaluate the multiple choice questions quality. We wanted to look at their relevance, accuracy, clarity, complexity, and then we wanted to compare the multiple choice questions from a generic large language model, so something that was untrained, a finely tuned or trained grounded model, the one we fed in Auerbach's and the clinical practice guidelines, and then some human expert questions. And we pulled our questions from MedWar, which is a big medical adventure race for wilderness medicine. So questions that were written by wilderness medicine educators. After looking at the quality, we wanted to assess what people thought the time savings would be by using AI instead of writing the questions themselves de novo. And then we also wanted to compare the perception. Could our audience tell the difference? Because a lot of people think they can tell the difference. So what we did is we generated questions with getting 15 multiple choice questions from the untrained Gemini, from our grounded or trained Gemini, and then 15 questions from human experts. We picked 5 common wilderness medicine topics to get these questions from. With the study design, the questions were then randomized using a number generator randomization to make sure they were truly randomized. And we created a test web-based that we sent out to all of our colleagues in various wilderness medicine educator groups with SAEM, ASAP, and the Wilderness Medical Society. We collected our data, looking at the correct responses to the questions, and then looking at how people rated the questions. That's what we were really interested in. And then the estimated time savings. So as you know, anyone dabbling in AI, your prompt generation is key. We didn't spend a lot of time working on this prompt or optimizing it, but this is what we came up with. And we actually had it generate 25 questions because we thought a little bit more of our colleagues than reality. So initially we were going to make a 75 question test, and then we realized the chances of getting any one of our wilderness medicine colleagues to do a 75 question test was not very likely. So we just randomized the questions that we got and picked the top 15 that came through. And we asked these questions to be aimed at the physician level because that's who we were asking to take our test. And we wanted 5 questions for hypothermia, 5 questions for drowning, 5 for heat illness, 5 for altitude medicine, and 5 for dive and marine medicine. And we asked for at least half of the questions to be scenario or case-based. We asked for the question stems should be a couple sentences long. And then for each question, we wanted a detailed explanation for each answer. So to let you know what this looks like, first of all, we let our participants know that they shouldn't base knowledge on this because these are AI untested questions and we did not review them beforehand. And we kind of gave them an idea of what we're looking for. We want to look at the relevancy. We wanted them just to answer the questions, not look up the answers somewhere. And then we can test it, they understood. And here is the first question that came on our randomization. So the weight belt on a scuba diver falls off and he has an uncontrolled rise to the ocean surface from 30 feet. He's unconscious with shallow breathing. What's the most likely diagnosis? Our participant would answer that question and then rate the question for relevancy. They would go to the next screen where they would get the answer to the question they had just answered, and then get 4 additional questions on a Likert scale to ask about whether the explanation was accurate, if it was clearly stated, if it was appropriate complexity, and then finally, if they thought the question and answer were written by AI. Our participants, we had about 81% of our participants were attendings. Otherwise, we had fellows and we had some medical students that participated as well. 57% were emergency medicine physicians, 22% family medicine physicians. Most of our participants had about 5 to 10 years of experience in wilderness medicine and all identified as active in wilderness medicine education. Interestingly, our respondents got the most questions right written by AI as opposed to their human colleagues, which is interesting. And however, with the p-value, this wasn't statistically significant. So, and then looking at the ratings, we were very surprised to find really no statistical significant difference across the categories. People ranked the relevance, accuracy, clarity, and complexity pretty similarly, regardless of what model was used to create questions. Interestingly, people, based on averages of the amount of time they thought it would take them to write this 45-question de novo versus to edit the 45-question test they were given, they said that it would save them about 190 minutes, so a little bit over 3 hours to use AI to write this test and just edit it, as opposed to have to write these questions themselves. Could we tell? Interestingly, no. No statistical significantly different between people judging whether general AI, grounded AI, or humans wrote the question on the Likert scale. So we can't tell the difference, or at least our group of educators could not tell the difference between AI questions and human questions, which I think is pretty huge. I think there's a lot of things in the world right now that we're pretty good at discerning that AI probably wrote that email that someone sent you that had a lot of emojis in it. We're not always, with multiple choice questions, we're not always there. So the conclusions from this, the quality of questions, trained or untrained, really have no statistically significant difference between the human written ones in correctness, relevancy, accuracy, or complexity. I think this is the sub kind of question here that we're not completely powered to look at, but grounded versus ungrounded, that's big when you're designing questions. So you can just go to your large language model. You don't necessarily need to feed in the textbook that you're using, the journal articles you're using. The general knowledge seems to be enough to write pretty accurate questions, which I think is pretty interesting. And then we always wonder, you know, is it a tool that's helping us? I would say 3 hours back in my life would make me a much happier human. I would much rather look over someone else's questions. You still have to look over the questions. We found 2 questions out of the 45 questions that were like, that's really either not right or not quite right, or maybe that explanation's not right. But that was all that we saw out of the questions that we created. And then trained versus untrained, no significant difference, as I said. And then hopefully this gives you a little bit of practical application. Next time you need to write a test question, if it's generic, you can use that large language model. If you're trying to do something like, hey, I wanted my learners to read this journal article, then use a trained version. Put that journal article in and ask for your questions. You'll find with the prompt, the more you play with the prompt, the better questions you can get. And that could be a future direction of this work, is to really work on tweaking our prompt, depending on the type of questions in the learner group we're looking for. Some of you guys may have seen you can actually feed other questions in that have been written to give AI an idea of the style or the complexity of questions you want. So there's a lot of cool future directions. And this was just kind of the tip of the iceberg and just a little bit of a pilot study to see, like, does this work? Can we use it? Does it save us time? So something I'm going to definitely put in my toolkit. You guys have any questions?
Yes. Flip question. So there's a New York Times article in the summer saying that learners resent the fact that we're using AI to generate test questions because we're not doing our job. How would you respond to that? Or how do you think students or learners might react to the fact that you're not doing the work? The computers do.
I think you are doing the work because you're reading the questions and you have that basis of knowledge to be able to evaluate the questions. a lot of the education stuff I do is on a volunteer basis, so I would have other feelings about that I won't state, but I think you could also probably flip the coin back on your learners, because I feel like a lot of learners now are also going to AI to find the answers. And I think the important skills, and I think this is how things are changing, you know, not that old, but like when I went to medical school, I carried little books in my pocket, and if I wanted to know something, I like pulled out the book and I looked it up because we didn't have like iPhones. So you could make that same argument going from pocket guides to the internet, because you can Google a lot of things, and that makes it pretty easy to use. So I would just say, let my learners know I'm embracing AI, and I encourage you to embrace AI, but not at the fault of learning the information, learning the critical thinking skills to take the information that AI is generating and to apply it to a complex situation, and to be critical when you're thinking about it. And that's what you're doing as an educator, you're being critical with the questions. Good question.